Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's now coming up to midday here. There's Big Ben behind us, I think, coming up. Yep, there it is. Prime Minister's questions will be with us in about 5 minutes' time. A very important PMQs, the first since the attacks in Paris. Always important for the Prime Minister, but almost probably even more important today for Jeremy Corbyn as he takes the stage. I doubt there'll be much crowdsourcing of questions from Mr. Corbyn today, but we'll find out. Laura Kuenssberg is with us, as always, the BBC's political editor. Laura, let me start with the government. There were lots of reports in the morning press that Mr. Cameron was moving towards a vote, would be before Christmas, that it looked like he was finally going to take the plunge, get his ducks in a row. And then I understand there's been a bit of reining back. Where are we?
Well, I think we're still in the position where David Cameron will not put a vote to the House of Commons unless not just he thinks he can win it, but he's sure he can win it comfortably. This is not something that the government wants to look like they've just sneaked through. They do not want to walk into those lobbies on the night of a potential vote not being sure that it's absolutely going to happen. This is not going to be on a knife edge. If it seems that it's on a knife edge, he won't do it. I think that's still quite clear.
How does he tell? Because his own side, his whips can tell him how many Tories are going to vote for him and how many potential rebels he faces. His whips can't tell him what the Labour Party is going to do.
Well, one of the interesting ideas doing the rounds at the moment is that the government may, and it is a theory doing the rounds, they may ask Labour MPs who are interested in voting for action, maybe as many as 50 of them, to put something in writing, to give them some kind of guarantee, to make some kind of public statement that they will back the government on this. Don't underestimate how bruised ministers still feel by what they see as Ed Miliband's betrayal on a very different vote, but a vote on action in Syria nonetheless in 2013. And I think they will be looking for something that at least looks like a guarantee. Now, whether or not that mechanism of a public written statement comes is a question that's not yet settled. But they are looking for solid, concrete things that they know they can take to the House and win comfortably. That's the point here. If it looks like it might be just by a sliver and there's a risk, it won't happen.
And as you say, he's dependent on the Labour Party now, to be sure. Not that, you know, he may still get victory without it, but to be sure, he's dependent. And it's a very difficult time because I think to use the word chaos in the Labour Party on these matters would not be an exaggeration. Well, let's just see. Mr. Jones is a shadow defence spokesman for the Labour Party. He was attacked, as Joe was saying, by Ken Livingstone, who's now heading up a review on defence policy, and he's now responding to Mr. Livingstone. Let's just have a look at this.
Well, people can have political differences, but I think to use mental illness as a tool to attack somebody you disagree with on a political issue, I think is disgraceful. I think Jeremy Corbyn has worked very hard, along with myself and other members of Parliament, to try and raise a stigma, take a stigma away from mental illness. And I think Ken Livingstone's comments show that we have a long way to go. His comments, frankly, are in the dark ages, and that's where they should stay.
So, the internal civil war continues there, the war of words.
Indeed, and in the last few minutes, Chris Leslie, who was the former Shadow Chancellor, who's not now in the Shadow team, but he's actually called on Ken Livingstone to resign from the Defence Review and possibly also from Labour's ruling committee, the National Executive Committee. I think what's happened in the last few days is very significant. We've always known there were very big differences between the Parliamentary Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn, but what we've seen here is those tensions smash up against something real. What happened in Paris and how Jeremy Corbyn has responded to it has caused a great deal of concern, not just amongst those who could be dismissed as sort of Blairite hacks, but amongst moderates in the Labour Party. Very important to say for many of Mr. Corbyn's supporters, the kinds of things he's been saying is exactly why he won. He doesn't believe in military intervention. He doesn't believe that violence is the answer to the problems that we face in this country. And he does believe that Western intervention is partly responsible for what's been happening here. But this morning, at this moment when the government wants military action, you have the Labour Party having a really damaging fight amongst themselves.
But at a time when the Labour Party seems to be at 60s and 70s on these key issues of national security, there is no sense that Mr. Corbyn is trying to reach out to the middle or to the right of his party. appointing Ken Livingstone is the exact opposite of doing that.
Indeed, and for many Labour MPs, the phrase that Kevin Jones uses there, which he may have used it for more than one reason, saying it's something from the dark ages. That is what many people in the Labour Party remember. They remember fights that they had in the 1980s, and they think that people who were involved in them are back now and trying to tell them what to do. This is a real clash of ideology here, and it's also a real clash of this sort of street fighting politics. There's a battle going on inside the Labour Party here. It's chaotic, yes, but it is a fight for the soul of who they really are and who they really represent. And interesting talking to MPs in the last few days, Jeremy Corbyn's supporters repeatedly, justifiably, talk so much about the mandate he got from members. More and more MPs are starting to talk privately about the mandate that they got from voters at the general election. 9 million voters, who they're sort of now seeing that in a slightly different frame in terms of Corbyn's mandate from members.
But Mr. Livingstone's appointment comes after a number of appointments which have hardly reached to the centre. Mr. MacDonald as the Shadow Chancellor, even the main unions were not too keen on that. Then this policy advisor who described various Labour people as scumbags of vile kits, Andrew Fisher. Then Seamus Milne, sort of neo-Stalinist from The Guardian. Now Mr. Livingstone in defence policy. Well, is there any... This question will have to wait because we're going to start to the Commons, but I will come back to it.
Do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Warden Marsden.
Mr. Speaker, may I associate myself, and I hope the whole House, with what the Prime Minister and others from the government have said about the attacks in Paris. No man or woman is an island. People from Blackpool were among those murdered on a Tunisian beach, and our tower was lit in red, white and blue like other places worldwide for those killed by the terrorists in France. Now, Mr. Speaker, I raised concerns with the Prime Minister here 2 weeks ago about neighbourhood policing and security being threatened by the scale of proposed cuts, and the Lancashire funding formula, which has now been admitted as flawed. Can I ask him to reflect on the words, "When facts change, I change my mind"? And when police local intelligence can be crucial against terrorists, perhaps this isn't the time to jeopardise it with arbitrary Treasury targets for cuts.
Minister.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Can I thank the honourable gentleman for what he says about Paris and the importance of the whole House coming together over this issue. And perhaps the House would like a brief update. As I said yesterday, one British national, Nick Alexander, was killed at the Bataclan Theatre. 3 other British nationals have now been released from hospital and have been returned to the UK. And the Foreign Office and Red Cross are providing support for at least another 15 British nationals for trauma. We'll make sure we provide all the support to those injured and traumatised by the events that have happened. There's been some progress this morning in France in terms of terrorist arrests, and perhaps I can say more about that later on during the session. On policing, what I'd say to the honourable gentleman is that we have, quite rightly, in this Parliament, protected counter-terrorism policing. We're going to protect that again in this Parliament. What we've done in terms of policing otherwise is we've seen an increase in neighbourhood officers of 3,800 over the Parliament, and we've seen a 31% cut in crime. Let me commend the police, not just counter-terrorism police, but all police for the work that they do, and we'll announce our proposals in terms of police spending next week.
Brendan Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, as our hearts go out to the people of France at this time, will the Prime Minister agree with me that the first duty of Her Majesty's government must be to protect British citizens from harm? So will he take immediate action to secure our UK borders from those who threaten our nation, and on security grounds alone restore complete sovereignty over our British borders from the European Union?
I think my honourable friend raises a very important question, and I want to explain in answering a very important point, which is because the UK is not in the Schengen area, we already retain full control over who is entering our country, and we're able to check all entrants at the border, EU nationals and EEA nationals included. And the House might be interested to know that since 2010, we've refused entry to almost 6,000 EU nationals, and over 3,800 of these were stopped at our juxtaposed border controls in Calais. In terms of other people we've stopped coming in, since 2010, we've denied entry to nearly 95,000 people. And of course, one of the principal reasons for not letting people to come into our country, EU nationals or non-EU nationals, is national security concerns. We have that situation already because we're not in Schengen.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start, Mr. Speaker, by expressing the horror of all those on this side of the House at the events in Paris on Friday evening, and our continued solidarity with the victims of all the people affected by conflict and terrorism, whether they be in Paris, Beirut, Ankara, Damascus, or anywhere else in the world. Nothing can justify targeting of innocent civilians by anyone. We know that at least one British national has been killed and many more injured. Many British people live and work in Paris. Millions visit Paris and France every year. Can the Prime Minister continue what he was saying earlier in response to my friend, the member for Blackpool, about the support given to British nationals affected by the attacks and what the government's latest advice is in travelling to France and our need to show the best possible normality in our relations with all the French people?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his remarks and say what a pleasure it was to be with him last night at the England-France football match, where I thought there was a tremendous display of solidarity. I'm sure they can sing the Marseillaise louder in the Stade de France, but I think we did a pretty good job yesterday, and I was proud to be there. I think he's absolutely right to say there is never any justification for terrorism, and we should all be clear about that right across the House at all times. He asked specifically about what more we can do to help British people caught up in these problems. I think Peter Ricketts, our ambassador in France, has done a brilliant job with his staff, and I've been keeping my eye closely on the consular situation, and I think everything that can be done is being done. In terms of our travel advice, it's all there on the Foreign Office website, but I agree with him. The most important thing is for people to carry on with their lives. It's very important that Eurostar continues to function, that flights continue to go, that people continue to travel, to enjoy London, to enjoy Paris, and to carry on going about our business. As we do so, yes, we need enhanced security, and that is happening with the way that the police are acting here in the UK and elsewhere, but one of the ways to defeat terrorism is to show them we will not be cowed.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that, sadly, after such atrocities as we've seen, intolerance often increases, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism and racism. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that it's vital that everyone in public life, particularly we as politicians, are careful how we discuss these issues? And will he also join with me in making it very clear that the dreadful events of terrorism in Paris have nothing in common whatsoever with the 2 million British Muslims in this country who are as appalled as anyone else by the events in Paris last Friday?
I'm happy to join the right honourable gentleman in that. In fact, some of the strongest and best statements following the Paris attacks have been made by a whole series of British Muslims coming together to say that these attacks are in no way carried out in their name. But I do think, and we talked about this yesterday, it raises an important issue, which is it cannot be said often enough that these butchers of ISIL are no reflection of the true religion of Islam, which is a religion of peace. But at the same time, we do have to recognise that whether these terrorists are in Tunisia or in Egypt or in Paris or in London, they spout the same bile that they claim comes from the religion of Islam. And that is why we have to take apart what they say and prove that's not the case. But it's not good enough to say there's no connection between these terrorists and Islam. They're making a connection. We need to prove it's not right. And as we do so, the support of Muslim communities, Muslim scholars, is absolutely vital, and I commend them for their work.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely a crucial way to help defeat ISIL is to cut off its funding, its supply of arms and its trade. can I press the Prime Minister to ensure that our allies in the region, indeed all countries in the region, are doing all they can to clamp down on individuals and institutions in their countries who are providing ISIL with vital infrastructure? Will he, through the European Union and other forums if necessary, consider sanctions against those banks and companies and, if necessary, countries who turn a blind eye to financial dealings with ISIL which assist them in their work?
No, well, we do play a leading role, as I said yesterday, in making sure that the supply of money and weapons and support is cut off. But I think we should be clear about where ISIL got their money from originally. What happened was that because we didn't have a government in Iraq that effectively represented all of its people, and because in Syria you have a leader who is butchering his own people, ISIL was able to get hold of oil, get hold of weapons, get hold of territory, get hold of banks, and it's that they've been able to use in order to fund their hatred and their violence. And so we cannot dodge forever the question of how to degrade and destroy ISIL, both in Iraq and in Syria. And that's why I'll be setting out my response to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. So yes, go after the money, go after the banks, cut off their supplies, but don't make that a substitute for the action that's required to beat these people where they are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next week, the Chancellor will present his autumn statement to the House. Can the Prime Minister clarify something about the source of the necessary extra funding to be set out for the security services, which we support? Will it come at the expense of other areas, either within the Home Office budget or within other areas of public spending, or from the reserves, or from new funding? Does he want me to go on longer so the Chancellor can explain the answer to him?
We will set out in full our decisions next week, but we've already said that we'll be funding an increase in the security services of 1,900 personnel. We'll be safeguarding the counter-terrorism budget, and we will be seeing an increase in terms of aviation security. All of this is part of an overall spending settlement. At the same time as funding our security, increasing our defence spending, we have to make decisions that eradicate our budget deficit and keep our economy strong. We don't do this just for the current generation, we do it for our children and our grandchildren, because none of these services, none of these things, not even strong defence, is possible without a strong economy.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm not absolutely sure where the money's coming from following the Prime Minister's answer, but no doubt it will come. Mr. Speaker, London has been targeted by terrorists before. And this weekend's events in Paris have focused attention not just on London, but obviously on other cities throughout the whole of Britain. Policing plays a vital role in community cohesion, gathering intelligence of those who may be about to be a risk to all of us. But this is surely undermined if we cut the number of police officers by 5,000. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, who said, and I quote, "I genuinely worry about the safety of London if the cuts go through on this scale"?
Minister.
Well, first of all, the right honourable gentleman asked where does the money come from. We on this side of the House never forget that every penny we spend comes from taxpayers. And borrowed money is simply taxes that are deferred. And that's why it's so important to eradicate our deficit at the same time as making sure we fund our security, intelligence services and police properly. Now, I've said we're protecting the counter-terrorism budget. We see a 3,800 increase in neighbourhood police officers in the last Parliament, at the same time as a 31% increase in 31% cut in crime. Now, his shadow Home Secretary has said that a 10% efficiency target for the police is doable. Is the Leader of the Opposition saying that he doesn't agree with his shadow Home Secretary? There does seem to be a little bit of disagreement on the opposition front bench today.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I have a question from a taxpayer, actually. And his name is John, and he says, at a time he says, Mr. Speaker, At a time when we're experiencing the greatest threats from terrorism ever faced, our police office numbers and the resources are being cut. And he goes on to say, demands on the police have been increasing steadily as budgets are slashed, increasing stress on officers. Couple that with detrimental changes to their pay, terms, conditions and pensions. It's no wonder that morale in the police force is so poor that 1 in 3 are considering leaving the force. Will he be able to tell us whether or not this community policing and other police budgets are protected or not in next week's autumn statement?
Minister.
Let me tell him again, neighbourhood policing numbers have gone up by 3,800. In the capital city, we've seen a 500% increase in neighbourhood policing. We've also, because we've cut bureaucracy, put the equivalent of an extra 2,000 police on the streets. But I'll tell the Leader of the Opposition something. As well as wanting resources, the police want the appropriate powers. And hasn't it come to something when the Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition thinks that the police, when confronted by a Kalashnikov-waving terrorist, isn't sure what the reaction should be?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the attacks on Paris were quite clearly an attack on all of us. Does the Prime Minister agree that our resolve must be unbreakable? We should hunt down ISIL wherever it is operating, wherever it is planning, wherever it is plotting. And if that means shoot to kill, then so be it. And if that means action in Syria, then so be it.
I think my honourable friend is right. What I've said is that in order to respond to this very severe threat that we face, we need focus on counter-terrorism here in the United Kingdom, giving our intelligence agencies the laws they need, giving our police the powers they need, and making sure we are vigilant. We need counter-extremism, as we were discussing earlier, the importance of stopping the poisoning of these young minds, not least through these radical preachers on the internet. But we also need to stop the problems at their source. We know where much of this problem is coming from. It is ISIL, not just in Iraq, but ISIL in Syria. So what I said to the House yesterday is I will prepare a detailed response to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee report to demonstrate that we do have a clear strategy of bringing in the neighbourhood powers, bringing in the regional powers, building a future for these countries and stability in the Middle East. But I believe part of that is taking action against ISIL wherever it is.
Sir Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the wake of terrorist outrages and the ongoing civil war in Syria, it's very welcome that there is significant diplomatic progress in trying to find a solution to the Syrian crisis. The UK joined the United States and France and Russia and Iran at talks in Vienna at the weekend, and all signed a communique committing to progress through the United Nations. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he will support a UN Security Council resolution on this before seeking to intervene militarily in Syria?
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman asking this question, because the point is this, that Russia has different aims to us and they have repeatedly threatened to veto any such resolution. Now, of course, it is always preferable in these circumstances to have the full backing of the United Nations Security Council, but I have to say what matters most of all is that any action we would take would both be legal and would help protect our country and our people right here. You cannot, as I said yesterday, outsource to a Russian veto the decisions we need to keep our country safe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first survey of UK public opinion on Syrian intervention since the Paris attacks by Survation has shown the following. 52% believe that, and I quote, "The UK should engage with all countries to coordinate an appropriate response militarily or otherwise backed by United Nations resolution," and only 15% believe the UK should independently launch airstrikes. Will the Prime Minister give a commitment to secure a UN Security Council resolution which the UK agreed to and Russia agreed to a route through the United Nations as well?
I couldn't be clearer with the right honourable gentleman, of course, it is always preferable, in whatever action you're taking, whether we are lifting people out of the Mediterranean, whether we're flying Baltic air patrolling missions over countries that feel a Russian threat, or if we're taking action in the Middle East against ISIL, it's always preferable to have a UN Security Council resolution. But if they are vetoed or threatened with a veto over and over again, my job, frankly, as Prime Minister, is not to read a Survation opinion poll, but is to do the right thing to keep our country safe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The French armed police who stormed the Bataclan and killed those vile, murderous scum are heroes. And so are the British armed police who protect our public spaces and the people. Will the Prime Minister send a note of unequivocal support today to those officers on patrol and ensure that in the review next week they have the resources they need to keep us safe?
Minister. I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. We ask the police every day to take risks on our behalf, and let me thank the police who policed so effectively the game at Wembley last night. In terms of what the French police have done, I think the House would welcome an update. We've seen the news of a police operation in Paris this morning. 2 terrorist suspects died, including a female suspect who blew herself up. 7 arrests are reported to have been made. This operation has now finished, and as the French Interior Minister has said, we should all acknowledge the bravery of the French police in dealing with what is a very challenging situation. Now, I hope there can be consensus across the House, and I mean right across the House on this. If we are confronted with a situation like this, the British police should not be in any doubt. If you have a terrorist who is threatening to kill people, you can, indeed you must, use lethal force.
Bill Wilson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a recent Financial Times article, President Obama said, "I have emphasised the importance of tax credits to help working families afford childcare and keep 2-earner families in the workplace." Does the Prime Minister agree with the importance the President of the United States has attached to tax credits?
Well, what I think is important is that we do the best we can to help low-paid people, and that's why we're taking people out of income tax. 3 million of the lowest paid taken out of income tax since I became Prime Minister. We're going to be setting an 11,000 threshold before people have to start paying tax at all. We're helping working families with childcare. We're helping with a national living wage of £7.20 starting next year, something I suspect President Obama would love to introduce in the United States. We're doing it right here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Integrating health and social care will be a great prize for devolved cities and regions. But without effective democratic and clinical oversight, things can go badly wrong. Already in Manchester, a major hospital reorganisation is awaiting judicial review. Can I urge my right honourable friend to ensure that proper safeguards are in place so that local authorities retain a last resort power to refer NHS changes for independent clinical review?
Minister. Well, I will look carefully at what my honourable friend says, but I think this does go to a larger point, which is we are currently changing the way our country is run. These big devolution deals, first to Greater Manchester, but now with the announcements yesterday to Liverpool and the West Midlands, mean we're going to have powerful metro mayors who are accountable to local people for the decisions that they make. I think that's a very direct form of accountability, and that's why I think we can be confident of devolving health and social care to those authorities. For too long, our country's been too centralised, and I think the great cities of Manchester and Birmingham, Liverpool, soon to be Leeds, I hope, will benefit from these massive devolution deals. But if we devolve the power and we devolve the money, we've got to devolve the trust and the accountability too.
Randy MacDonald.
Against the backdrop of a tidal wave of local job losses, the Teesside Collective for Industrial Carbon Capture has the very real potential to secure a major step change in our industrial renaissance. Ahead of the Paris conference, will the Prime Minister meet with me and the industrial leaders driving this project so we can secure these immense climate change gains with the UK leading this new industrial revolution and make this initiative a reality for Teesside and the UK?
Well, I know how important it is that we all work on behalf of Teesside, not least because of the difficulties that there have been in Redcar, and that's why we have the task force, and that's why the additional resources are going in. I'm very happy to look at the project he talks about. It may be best for him to meet with the Energy and Climate Change Secretary, because we've got to make important decisions about all of these technologies in the run-up to the Paris conference and beyond.
Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In my constituency of North Warwickshire, manufacturing is thriving thanks to innovative small businesses such as Powercut and Naismith Group, who are creating high-quality local jobs and apprenticeships in the engineering sector. Given the challenges that these types of companies face in finding traditional bank and funding support, what assurances can the Prime Minister give that this Conservative government understands the importance of our innovators and will continue to provide initiatives such as the Annual Investment Fund to ensure British businesses continue to lead the way?
Well, what I'd say to my honourable friend is we want to rebalance the British economy, not just in terms of the devolution of power I've just talked about, but also see a thriving manufacturing sector. Manufacturers have said to us that what they want to see is continued investment into the catapult centres that do a good job of making sure technology is taken up. They want to see strong support for the apprenticeship programme, and we've targeted 3 million apprentices during this Parliament, but they also want to make the annual investment allowance permanent, and it will be permanent at £200,000 throughout this Parliament, so manufacturing and companies and others that want to make investments know that they can do so in a way that will be profitable for them.
John Mann.
My niece, Ruby, is safe and well, having been caught up in the aftermath of the Paris attacks, and talking to her, she wants to know, as a student for 3 years in Paris, whether this country is going to be safe on her return. She's got a question for the Prime Minister. She's worried about the cuts to the ambulance, the police and the fire services in this country, and whether we'll have the preparedness with those cuts that was shown by those emergency services in Paris. And I also want to know why we're not joining with the Russians to get a UN mandate to remove ISIS from Syria.
Well, first of all, can I say how glad I am to hear that his niece is safe after these terrible attacks. To answer her question very directly, we are doing everything we can to make sure this country is safe. After the intelligence we had some years ago about the potential of a marauding firearms attack at multiple locations in perhaps the capital city or elsewhere in our country, we have run exercises, we've done research, we've looked at everything we can to make sure, for instance, that ambulances and their crews will be able to go into a so-called hot zone and recover casualties, that we have the right number of armed police in the different parts of our country, that we can respond, including using other forces in all the ways that we can. We've looked carefully at what the French have done in terms of surging troops onto their streets, and we've made sure that that can now happen here and the permissions are all given. There's never 100% guarantee of safety in any country, but I'd say to your niece we're doing everything that we possibly can.
Jesse Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In that spirit, I warmly congratulate the Prime Minister on new funding that's been announced for Special Forces equipment. But may I draw his attention to the plight of David and Maria Summers in my constituency, who have struggled to obtain a permanent residency for Maria despite being married for 45 years. And may I ask the Prime Minister if he would encourage officials to look again at this case?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to look again at this case, but it does give me the opportunity, given the constituency he represents, to just say something about a group of people that we say very little about because we don't comment on the amazing work they do. But Hereford is a very important part of the nation's security, both domestically and overseas. Very, very brave people work there, and we should all give them our credit.
Tulip City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent was a soldier in Iraq and Afghanistan and is currently training to be a doctor in London. He told me that with the proposed junior doctors' contracts, morale in the NHS is lower now than at any point during his time on the front line. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that low morale amongst our junior doctors and nurses is a threat to patient safety?
Well, what I'd say to the Honourable Lady's constituency, and indeed to all junior doctors, is please look very carefully at what the government is offering before you decide to go on strike. Because what is on offer is not an increase in hours. Indeed, for many doctors, it will mean less long hours. It's not a cut in the pay bill for junior doctors. It's actually an 11% basic pay increase. It'll mean a better rostering of doctors, including at weekends, with more support for consultants. And I'd say to her constituent, as I'd say to others, go on the Department of Health website, look at the pay calculator and see how you will be affected, because we've given a guarantee that anyone working legal hours will not be worse off under this contract. This is good for the NHS, good for doctors, good for patients, and even at this late hour, I hope the BMA will call off their damaging strike.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fundamental to the success of the Good Friday Agreement was a spirit of peace and reconciliation that saw dozens or even hundreds of convicted terrorists released from prison. Many had been found guilty of murder. Yet in the last week, we hear the alarming news of a 66-year-old former paratrooper being arrested in connection with events that took place in Londonderry 43 years ago. In a week when we are all having to once again contemplate sending our young men and women into harm's way with our security services and police on high alert, what message does the Prime Minister feel this sends to our armed forces, our police and our security services?
Minister. What I would say to my honourable friend, and I understand his concern and the feelings that many will have on seeing this news, but the truth is about our country is one of the most important things about it is the government doesn't decide who is prosecuted and who is not prosecuted. We have the rule of law. We have independent prosecuting authorities. This is something that people across the world cry out for, and we have here, and we have to support them even when they take decisions that sometimes we would want to question. Let me just in that context make a broader point that yesterday the parties, the principal parties in Northern Ireland, came together and agreed a deal to make sure that the devolved institutions can continue to work. Now, that deal involved people who have lost loved ones to terrorism, who've been opposed to each other all of their lives, sitting down, working together to try and deliver good government for this part of our United Kingdom. And it's that spirit we should look to for the future.
Imran Hussain.
Mr. Speaker, the decision last week by HMRC to close their offices in the Bradford district will mean the loss of over 2,000 high-skill, high-wage jobs, 1.2 million in business rates and almost 12 million of the district's retail spending. This will have a devastating impact on Bradford's families and economy. So can the Prime Minister give me assurances that HMRC will meet with Bradford MPs to consider the clear economic and social case for keeping those offices in Bradford open?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I'm happy to ask the Financial Secretary to meet with the local MPs. The second thing I'll say is that we'll make sure that Job Centre Plus and all the support is there for people who potentially are losing their jobs. The point I'd make in Bradford more broadly is, of course, the claimant count is down by 26% in the last year, so jobs are available. But let me make this point because it is a difficult and important point to make. Everyone in this House wants to see HMRC raise more money and make sure that people don't and companies don't avoid their taxes. And that does mean reform, and it means to make sure that HMRC is even more effective in raising the taxes on which our public services depend.
Sir Alan Hazelhurst.
Acknowledging that sport can bring a nation together, and for that matter nations, as was demonstrated at Wembley last night, would my right honourable friend ensure that in addition to the welcome extra investment in the police and security services, investment in sports such as cricket will be maintained because they are a tool to help us face longer-term challenges in integrating communities?
Well, I'm sure that over the next week the spending requests will quicken as we get closer to the spending review. I think it is important that we've put in place the school sport premium for primary schools, and it's making a real difference. But of course there's a role for the sporting bodies to play themselves. Many of them receive large amounts of money from the television contracts, and the more of them that can use that money to invest in grassroots sports to make sure we're bringing on the young stars of tomorrow, that is absolutely vital.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the new leader of the anti-austerity movement in Oxfordshire, can the Prime Minister tell us how is his campaign going?
Prime Minister!
What I said to my local council is what I say to every council, which is you've got to get more for less, not less for more. As I said, on this side of the House, we want to make sure that every penny that's raised in council tax is well spent. And if his council would like to come in and get the same advice, I'll gladly oblige.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at a time when my right honourable friend so rightly emphasises the need for our solidarity with France, could I ask him if he could see what he could do to ensure that the Franco-British Council, set up over 40 years ago by both governments to promote civil society partnership, can continue to do its important work in fields as diverse as defence and community cohesion? Because without a very small amount of funding from both governments, it will not be able to do that.
I'm very happy to look at that proposal. I think, look, frankly, France and Britain have a lot to learn from each other, and we should enter into these discussions in that spirit. We've got a lot to learn about how we try and integrate people into our country, a lot to learn about how we have effective counter-terrorism policing, a lot to learn about how we share intelligence, and I'm very committed to making sure that we pursue all those things with our French friends.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wigan Council has had over a 40% cut in its funding over the last 5 years and lost a third of its staff. Does the Prime Minister advise that I should write to the Leader of the Council regarding the consequent reductions in services? Or should I place the blame firmly where it belongs, in the hands of his government?
I think if the Honourable Lady is looking for someone to blame, she might want to blame the Labour Party that left this country with the biggest budget deficit anywhere in the Western world. And as she does so, the advice I'd give her about her local council is look at its overall spending power. It's the combination of business rates, council tax and grant, and ask what money they've got to provide good local services.
Order.
Prime Minister's questions come to an end, predictably dominated by the events in Paris. We'll unravel what was said in a few moments. While the PMQs was going on, President Hollande of France was giving a press conference. He said France is at war with Islamic State. He wants a large coalition, his words, working together against IS militants to destroy a group that threatens the whole world and commits massacres in the Middle East. Hollande said, we are at war, and that he also said that the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is now, I think today, leaving the French Mediterranean naval port of Toulon to head for the Middle East region to help French military operations in the Syrian area. Interestingly, it is going to be accompanied by a British destroyer, which will provide air defence cover for the Charles de Gaulle against any possible attacks there. The British are sending HMS Defender, which is an advanced Type 45 air defence destroyer, to accompany the French carrier into the region. So I guess those who were calling that second last question there about Anglo-French cooperation are sending a destroyer to help protect the French aircraft carrier will, I guess, be some of that in action. Let's hear what you thought of PMQs before we go to our panel.
Yes, Ed Buxton says the exchanges between the two leaders began with the House of Commons at its best, statesman-like questions and answers. Then it turned. Both leaders let themselves down by playing politics with national security. Morwyn Dobbs says, I worry greatly for the Labour Party. It is becoming increasingly evident that for voters like me, there is no alternative to this Conservative government. Gareth Latham says, please, please, please challenge the Prime Minister's answer about there being 3,800 more neighbourhood police. This is at best wrong, at worst a lie. I'm a neighbourhood police officer and there has been no increase. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. Bill Waterman on the same theme. David Cameron is away with the fairies with regards neighbourhood policing. It's being decimated. All forces are doing is calling other officers neighbourhood officers, but they are not walking the streets.
OK, thanks, Joe. I'm going to come back to the question I was just coming to before we had to go to PMQs. But before I do, give me your overall impression of what happened.
Well, I think something very interesting just happened there. Yesterday, the Prime Minister told the House of Commons he wants to make a case for military action, the most serious thing that a Prime Minister really can do. Jeremy Corbyn chose not to ask the Prime Minister a question on that. Now, there are all sorts of reasons for that. It's difficult territory for him. The Prime Minister gave quite a full statement yesterday saying what his strategy would be. But nonetheless, this is one of the most significant things that a government can say that it wants to do, and the opposition leader, due to the strange sort of times that we're in, chose not to go on that particular question. It was left instead to the leader of the third biggest party, Angus Robertson, the SNP leader at Westminster, to put that question twice about whether or not the government would seek a mandate from the United Nations. And very significant there, David Cameron said twice he did not believe that he would have to go to the UN. Ideal, preferable, he said, but he didn't say he'd do it.
Well, all right. Now, let me come back to this. We were talking about the kind of appointments Mr Corbyn has made, and we went through the list. I won't go through it again, but it's culminated in Ken Livingstone now being in charge of a defence review, along with the Shadow Defence spokeswoman. What I was going to ask is, when you look how provocative some of these appointments are to the centre and the right of the Labour Party, is he trying to provoke an early leadership challenge so he gets it over with?
Well, I asked a member of the Shadow Labour team this morning if they thought that actually Jeremy Corbyn was trying to force them all suddenly to resign. Now, he said, well, I don't know about that, but suggested that sometimes it feels that way. Now, there's a spectrum of sort of, I suppose there's a spectrum of paranoia at one end, saying everything that Jeremy Corbyn is doing is trying to provoke an enormous bust-up, trying to cause a mass exit of people from the party. On the other side, you say, well, look, Jeremy Corbyn is actually just doing exactly what he said he would always going to do. He's sticking to his principles and appointing a team in his image. There's one very important thing that's happening here, though, and we're sort of on this journey where day by day, the Make It Work Brigade, as people have been calling them, are finding it harder and harder and harder to make it work. The appointment of Ken Livingstone is just the latest in a line of these kinds of things. In the next few weeks, we've got Jeremy Corbyn planning to attend a Stop the War event at the beginning of December.
Christmas party.
Indeed, Labour MPs have asked him not to attend. At the moment, it looks like he's still going. And next week, the Labour Party is trying to ask Labour MPs to abstain on a vote on Trident, which is being put forward by the SNP, and actually defy the party's own official policy.
Well, you mentioned the continued argy-bargy within the Labour Party. We've had this developing row now between Kevin Jones, speaks on defence for Labour, said he didn't quite know what Ken Livingstone's credentials were for heading up a review of Labour defence policy. Mr Livingstone hit back saying that to the worst of the effect that Mr Jones needed some treatment for his mental problems. Kevin Jones hit back at him, and now we have Mr Livingstone. All this happening in one morning. One morning. Here is Mr Livingstone. This is what he had to say on LBC.
If he apologises for criticising my ability to do this job, that's
no,
fine.
but you have control over your professional capacities. He has no control over his mental health.
If he wants to apologise, that's fine.
No, Ken, just say sorry to the man. He suffers from clinical depression, and you've cast aspersions on his psychiatric health. It's a really bad look.
He was rude about me. I was rude back to him. He needs to get over it.
Would you have said the same things about him needing psychiatric help and being very obviously disturbed and depressed if you knew that he actually was a sufferer from clinical depression?
Of course I wouldn't have done.
Well, there you go. Next word is sorry, I think. No?
Don't wait for it. I mean, once he apologises for criticising my appointment, I might be nice to him, but until then, got to live with it.
Ken Livingstone, LBC, just an hour or so ago. Lisa Nandy, should he apologise?
Yeah, he should absolutely apologise. When Joe was asking me about it earlier, I hadn't heard confirmation of what he'd said, but it sends such a damaging message to anybody who's struggling with mental illness around the country. Of course he should apologise. That's the right thing to do.
Laura talked about what she, I think, very graphically called the Make It Work Brigade within the Labour Party beginning to despair. Are you part of the Make It Work Brigade?
We're all in the Make It Work Brigade. The point about Labour is that in the last few...
Are you beginning to despair then as well?
No, absolutely not. In the last few weeks, what we've seen is Jeremy Corbyn changing the tone at PMQs, taking on the PM over tax credits, and I hope forcing him to rethink his plans to cut the incomes of some of the poorest people in the country, and forcing him to start taking seriously the crisis that's unfolding in the steel industry. That's what we're focused on, and it's absolutely right that we should.
On the issue of the Russian veto, if we went to the UN and Russia vetoed our attempts to get involved further in the Middle East, would that be the end of it for Labour?
Well, it would depend on the deal that Cameron was putting forward. And we've said very clearly, Hilary Benn and Jeremy Corbyn have said that we'll consider the plan that David Cameron puts forward. If, at the moment, we've got talks going on in Vienna that look like they may make some progress towards a full political and diplomatic settlement in Syria. It looks like we are making some progress towards that. Now, it's an incredibly difficult situation, but
if the Russians vetoed our foreign policy, Labour would go along with that. That's my question.
Well, it depends on the plan that David Cameron puts forward. He said himself yesterday that simply dropping a few bombs is not going to transform the situation in Syria.
That.
We have been absolutely clear that he ought to go to the UN and try to get a mandate for any action.
And if Russia vetoed it, that would be the end.
It should only take place as part of a wider plan. So Russia are involved in those talks in Vienna at the moment, as are we. I hope that will give us the plan that we need.
Should Ken Livingstone, given his failure to apologise to Mr Jones, should he resign from, or indeed be fired from this defence review?
Well, the body that takes action on matters like this is the National Executive Committee. My understanding is that they're the body that have appointed him to lead this review.
Sure, but I was asking simply for your view.
Well, if he doesn't apologise, I would expect that this would go back to the National Executive Committee and they would take action. And I think that would be the right thing to do, and I would
he's defying the Labour leader.
Well, my view is that he should apologise. I think it sends a very damaging message to people around the country.
And if he doesn't?
He should do it. Then it should go back to the National Executive Committee and they should take action.
But take action, what does that mean?
Well, I can't preempt what they would decide.
No, but I'm asking for your view. By take action, do you mean they should fire him from this position?
My preference would be that he would apologise, or that they would persuade him to apologise.
But I'm asking again,
I think that would be a much more productive
and they can't persuade him to do so. He told us in that clip from LBC not to hold our breath, not to wait for an apology. If he doesn't, in your view, would you like the NEC to demand he steps down?
I think it would be very difficult to move forward on the basis on which we currently are without an apology. I think we would have to find a way to bring forward a solution that would mean that that body could work together. And at the moment, Andrew, honestly, that doesn't look likely in my book.
I understand. Thank you for that. Let me go straight to John Woodcock, who is in the Central Lobby in the House of Commons, Labour MP. What do you make, Mr Woodcock, of Mr Livingstone's refusal to apologise or withdraw his remarks about Kevin Jones?
I think it's really disappointing, and I hope that when the sound and fury of this morning has died down, he does reflect on this issue, because Kevin Jones's bravery in speaking out about depression in the House of Commons, when no one else really had done that before, was it's what led me to be able to feel able to talk about the depression that I had suffered. And I think it sends a terrible signal if we say that this is just part of the normal toing and froing of political debate. It isn't. And we've had, Ken last week said that Maria Eagle was mad for if she thought of a particular way. And I know that people speak loosely with that kind of language, but this was something else. And I'm not going to get drawn into, I thought Lisa, I think you've spoken really well on this, and I'm not going to get drawn into the issue of whether he should remain as chair, because I have big issues with him being chair for different reasons.
All right, well, let me ask you about them. Well, given that Mr Livingstone seemingly didn't know about Mr Jones's depression issues, so let's say that Mr Livingstone is not necessarily anything of an expert on mental health issues. Could you explain to our viewers what are his qualifications, his defence expertise? What does he have in that area to head up this defence review?
Well, I'm unable to explain to your viewers that. What has concerned? I have concerns about whether the Shadow Defence Secretary was properly consulted on this. What were the reasons for him being appointed? But that, for me, is a separate issue to the really serious thing about a leading member of the Labour Party quite openly using inappropriate language around mental health and then refusing to withdraw it. So I think aside from the toing and froing of internal Labour Party reviews, which sometimes is hard to even excite Labour Party members about, a much more serious issue is that we can speak to each other in a decent and human way, and that we can actually make normal being able to discuss mental health conditions without them becoming terms of abuse.
I understand that on the issue of mental health, but I take it what you're saying is that you don't understand why Mr. Corbyn has appointed Mr. Livingston to head up a defence review, given you don't think Mr. Livingston has any expertise in defence issues.
Well, if he has, I guess he has kept them quiet over the years. I think that's probably the most diplomatic thing I could say.
All right. Can I just ask you one final question, Mr. Woodcock? I know we got you at the last minute. Isn't it a problem for your party that on a morning when we are dealing with the aftermath of Paris and the ongoing anti-terrorist operation there and the obvious risk to this country, that Her Majesty's official opposition, rather than playing a full role in the national debate on this, has been sidetracked into essentially a slanging match between two Labour members?
Well, look, it's not great that this is happening, but be under no doubt that I think hopefully all of us here, certainly myself and everyone that I know, is absolutely focused on the issues of how we can combat Daesh, both in terms of maximising our internal security and what we can do beyond our borders to rid the Middle East region of this terrible evil, and
all right,
we will go on doing that.
I said that was my last. I've got one more quick one for you. Given Mr. Corbyn's remarks to Laura Kuenssberg about shoot to kill, given his remarks about Jihadi John, he should have been arrested rather than eviscerated by a drone, given his appointment of Mr. Livingston, do you still have confidence in Mr. Corbyn as leader of your party?
Well, Jeremy remains our elected leader with a substantial majority. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Do you still have confidence in him?
But obviously it's not an ideal situation that even the Shadow Foreign Secretary doesn't feel that he can speak for him. And I hope that we can I hope that we can resolve this and be able to work on a better basis than we have been doing over the last few days.
Are you optimistic about that or depressed by the prospects?
I think optimism and depression in the current context is not quite how I describe it. I'm going to keep on doing the best job I can for my constituents, and what else will happen will happen.
Mr. Woodcock, thank you for joining us live from the central lobby there in the House of Commons. Laura, a thought from you on what you hear? I mean, I have to say, as a journalist, of quite long standing, not great standing, but long standing, I have never covered anything like this.
I have to say, from Monday night after the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, I have never had conversations like some of the conversations I had with MPs coming out of that meeting. Crucially, not people who we know where they stand in terms of the Labour Party, but moderate people. One of them said to me, I feel physically sick. I do not know how much longer I can cope with this. Feelings are so high. But just as John Woodcock was hinting at the end of his interview there, which I thought he sort of managed his way out of that very diplomatically at the end, the context of the leadership election and Jeremy Corbyn's very resounding victory mean even for those who think it's impossible, even for those who think it's not sustainable, the electorate would still be the same. There is no alternative. There's nobody waiting in the wings to sort of rush forward. But the question of how this operation sort of survives day by day is a very, very live one. And just briefly worth mentioning, yesterday in the House of Commons, of course, most people were focused on what David Cameron said. But after David Cameron finished, Labour MP after Labour MP stood up and made comments that were in open defiance of Jeremy Corbyn. This is not just about rushed conversations on mobile phones with journalists. This is starting to happen in public now by people not all on the right of the party.
We only time for, I mean, in a sense, given what's happened in the past 10 minutes or so, you've had a kind of get out of jail card, haven't you? You don't. We're all concentrating on Labour, and we don't.
They are. It is chaotic.
Given the problems the opposition has, would it not be incumbent on the Prime Minister, therefore, on matters of national importance, to be showing a bit more leadership?
I think he showed lots of leadership there. But the crucial thing here is I think Labour are in a real muddle, and Corbyn...
Oh, come on.
I mean, Corbyn actually Corbyn will need to act on
I didn't ask for your analysis of
Well, I'm
the
not sure what
Labour
you mean by
Party.
leadership. I think David Cameron is showing
Well, we
leadership.
still don't have the comprehensive strategy on how to handle Syria, and we still do not know whether or not we're going to get a vote in the Commons on this.
Well, he's been very clear. He's going to set out a response to that Foreign Affairs Committee report, and that he recognises the need for a strategy, and they're working on it. And you know, that will come through. I don't accept there's a lack of leadership at all. I think you saw leadership in spades there today from David Cameron.
You would say that. Thank you, Laura. Busy day for you.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it.